Hi everyone, I'm Airier, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be looking at Netflix live adaptation of Cowboy Bebop, and yes, that does pain me to even bring it up, and the brand new movie Dune. You might think completely different from Cowboy Bebop's adaptation. And in all but a very few ways, you would be right. For anyone who doesn't know, Cowboy Bebop was a 90s anime that was, and I'm going to very heavily summarize this, effing amazing. And then Netflix looked at Dragon Ball Evolution and said, hold my beer. Thankfully, they didn't get to that level, but it's not a spoiler at this point to say what Netflix did to Cowboy Bebop, they were really trying to Dragon Ball Evolution that. Great CGI. Everything else, though, don't. I'm keeping my thoughts on that brief because what I really want to focus on is this movie, Dune, and the TV show, Cowboy Bebop, have one thing they really do share and really heavily drew on in different ways. Netflix, nostalgia everywhere. Dune, nostalgia everywhere. Both iterations had massive nostalgia trips for the people who loved the source material. For the anime fans who love Cowboy Bebop, just hearing the new tank opening was freaking amazing. And honestly, Jet looked like he was the perfect person to play everything about it. Yeah, he looked and sounded like Jet needed to. His dialogue was... his characterization was... But they used nostalgia to get in there. They made it look great. They made it look like the show needed to. And then once the nostalgia trip of, this is amazing, we get to see our favorite people again, wore off, all you were left with was, this isn't it. This isn't a good adaptation. This isn't an adaptation. This is a bad fan fiction that didn't really pay homage to the source material, didn't make any meaningful changes, didn't change anything differently. It's like, hey, what if we do the exact same thing, but worse? I'm not one of the people who's going to say an adaptation needs to be faithful to the source material. It just needs to be good. If it stands on its own as a good piece of fiction, literature, movies, TV show, I'll be fine with a lot of radical changes. Changing Spike from the brooding, but somewhat cool and kind of nihilistic and okay with it dude, to someone who's really hung up on his girlfriend and doesn't really, admit to things. It's like really in his own head a lot more. Okay. Was it done well? I think some of the scenes cut around him were overdone, and the actor portrayed it well. It just was a good portrayal of a bad character. They didn't do Spike justice, and they didn't change him in ways that were interesting or fun. So it failed, which is basically the entire Netflix show. But then on the other hand, you have Dune, which also played heavily into a lot of nostalgia. I grew up in high school. Wow, I sound old. Reading Dune. I discovered the books just in the back on a black shelf, the black cover. No one had touched it for a while because my high school didn't go into the library much. I discovered the Frank Herbert books and I read them and I loved them. Sometimes they were a little raunchier than I expected for a high school library. Then I realized, okay, yeah, no, they were originally published in a serial publication in Playboy. So when people said they read Playboy for the images, they meant Dune. That is what the articles were. Yeah, crazy. Things I still like talking about because it's just hilarious to me. I've seen a lot of discussion whether it's good, whether it's bad. A lot of people went into it thinking it was an action flick. It was going to be an Avengers movie. Oh dear God, no, it was not an Avengers movie. It was, here is a lot of political turmoil and infighting, but we're going to just keep it to the side and just do it at the right moment to make sure someone fails utterly. And they condensed the story. They took out a lot. They took out almost all of the exposition. They cut it down to minimum a couple words. Maybe a scene to show someone doing something a little out of the ordinary. But by God, if you went into it with anything other than the hope of it being a Marvel blockbuster, if you had nostalgia for this, if you loved what canon Dune was, if you liked the building drama, the tension, just that self-discovery of Paul, the main character. If you enjoyed that, this was good. It played to nostalgia. It gave you the hits you needed. It showed you the pain box, whose name I can never remember, literally after reading that book over and over for literal decades, multiple decades. So many scenes that needed to be there were there. Were they shortened? Sure. Were they abbreviated? Sure. Were they missing context? Oh God, yes. So much of Dune was context, was just world building, finding out what a mentat was, what a doctor in Dune's world did. Why is religion a thing here? Which was brought up in the movie, but you kind of know it's a thing, but it never really played a part. So much of it was context to let you build the world. And the movie didn't cut it all out. It just simplified it down to just what you can see in a few seconds, in a few quiet moments where no one's really talking. You're just seeing the progression of events. And I love this because it does what Netflix failed to do with Cowboy Bebop. The difference they did is very much the approach. Cowboy Bebop was going to do our own thing. We're just going to ram in there and just see if we can take some of the hits people like and then make our own thing. And then Dune was, we are going to do a faithful adaptation, but we're going to cut 90% of the fluff because we cannot get it in there. They did. They still had the show, and then they stretched it out to give the audience time to breathe. Time to contemplate why this looks weird. When you're first shown a mentat working and the eyes roll back in the head, and then he just spits out a bunch of crazy, complicated numbers, you don't need to know about the history, the training, the mental conditioning, the history behind the order. You know that man is basically outdoing a computer on the fly, and someone in power, Leto, needed that because that was amazing. And you never see computers. You see technology, but never a computer interface. And that's so much of a lore angle. And if you pay attention, if you know lore, if you have the nostalgia, you would see it and you would understand, and you don't need to have it explained to you because you know. And the movie took advantage of that. For someone who doesn't really know what's going on, for someone coming into it blind without nostalgia, it's a little confusing, but it's kind of cool. Which is perfectly acceptable for a movie. Kind of cool, and not overwhelming you with a bunch of exposition is fine. In a book, you can do it because you can pace it out. Some better than others, but you can do that. You have time. In a movie, you don't. You have a runtime. You have to stick to that. You can stretch it out. You can make it a long movie. But there is a definitive mark where it becomes a long movie to an, oh dear God, I want this to end. I personally think between the 3 hour, 2.5 hour mark is somewhere around that window where it goes from being long to I need to use the restroom and this movie is literally causing me physical pain. It's around that window. I'm not even going to bring up Ben-Hur's runtime. We're just not. But that's the real difference. It's the approach both movies took. For example, what Netflix did, as opposed to just giving you the hits, letting you know what was going on, they really hammered in elements. So when they took the nostalgia, they took an audience that was really giddy to get what they already knew. They decided, you know what's going to be great? Let's just hammer in all the themes they already know exist, overdo them, and make them functionally meaningless. I am looking at you, the damn rose falling in the church. That was a very powerful scene in canon. And I'm going to call canon the anime because I will not do that for Netflix's show. That is fan fiction. Bad fan fiction. I like fan fiction. This is bad. It's to the side. It's its own thing. Its own bad thing, minus the CGI. What they did was over-explain. They overindulged. They overcommitted images because they didn't trust the fans to remember through the nostalgia of what's actually going on. And that's part of the reason things went bad. Also, because it was bad characterization. Good actors doing bad characterization. For example, Faye, and I'm going to piss people off here, I like how she was portrayed in other movies. And I'm going to say movies because she basically was a Marvel character with how she was slapstick, she was funny, easy-go-lucky, making quips all the time. Yeah, no, that would have fit well in a Marvel movie. In Cowboy Bebop, they didn't really change the setting enough to make her character fit. They didn't really give her anything, and They was like, oh yeah, you're still Faye. You're still going to be relying on nostalgia to make people like you, but you're also a completely different person. There's ways this can work, and I'm going to say something very controversial here. The Ghost in the Shell live-action remake did this better. Despite all the controversies, which they kind of addressed, but honestly, they should have addressed better. Despite the oversimplification of Gundam, Ghost in the Shell's storyline, it was a good introduction. And that's all that really was. It's, okay, here's kind of the basic hits of Ghost in the Shell. It's going to have a few scenes that are iconic, and they're going to be done well. And the characters aren't bad. It's just going to have plot issues. But it'll look cool. It was okay. I thought it was perfectly passable. I mean, if someone gave me a gift of it, I'd be like, okay, that's nice. I'll keep it. Maybe watch it again. Yeah, sure. I wouldn't go out of my way to get it, but it would be a solid 5 or 6 out of 10. It's like, okay, I mean, not really worth going out to buy. If it's on sale, I might consider it. It's just good. And then there's Cowboy Bebop, where it's like, if I see it, no. If someone gifted it to me, I would ask for a receipt. Because they know exactly what they did. And that's not okay. Both came in with a lot of fans very hyped. Dune had backlash because the marketing made it seem like an action flick. It wasn't. It actually was very faithful to the books. But they just cut down the exposition. Where, I was going to say I lost Star. God, I hope they don't do that. Where Cowboy Bebop was paying homage to the original in its marketing, but then decided to do its own thing, and not very well. They both approached it in the probably wrong way, and both of them ended up doing something completely different. But Dune succeeded because it was still a standalone good movie that didn't need nostalgia. It just used it, even if the marketing didn't really use it well. Again, that they made it seem like an action movie. They showed you the entire action scenes. Like, all of them are kind of hit on the advertising trailers. That was literally all of them. Netflix didn't do that. They relied on nostalgia. They gave you all the hits of all the scenes you loved. All of the scenes that were probably pulled to say, hey, remember this scene that was really great where Spike and Vicious are posing at the end before a stained glass window, and it's really powerful and people always talk about this? Let's put it in the intro. Everything about it was appealing to nostalgia to cover up a weak story, a weak adaptation, a weak budget, because they spent all of it on CGI. And honestly, the CGI, I'm going to keep saying it, it looks good. But the story was weak. The adaptation was weak. The changes they made weren't for the better. But it's just so interesting how nostalgia is the groundwork for both movies. It's why, I keep saying both movies, both pieces of media, between the movie and the TV show, between how much they put into it, how much they remain faithful, how much they change, how much they cut out. But they're very different in the fact that what they're giving you in Cowboy Bebop doesn't really fit the tone of the original. And what they give you in Dune, despite the marketing saying otherwise, really does fit the thought-provoking and intellectualized nature. The characters in Dune overthink everything. It's one of the issues. People had plans on plans, wheels within wheels, schemes upon schemes, until the point where those broke down and they got absolutely screwed because of the breakdown. And the movie got that. And it was good. And then Cowboy Bebop was, these are broken people who come together to form a family, but they're still fundamentally broken. And at the end, it kind of destroys them. Things could have gone worse. They could have gone better, but they could have gone worse. And I'm just going to keep telling myself that because it's much less depressing to think. But at the end of the day, both shows relied on nostalgia as what would draw people to them. Where Dune didn't need the nostalgia, it would function on its own. But Cowboy Bebop, they needed the nostalgia to draw people and to draw the eyes in. And just to keep them going to the next episode, because each individual episode kind of failed and just got more and more insulting to the memory without adding anything to it. And I'm not even going to talk about Radical Edward. We're just not going to bring that up. This is Very important, because a lot of TV shows now in Hollywood and videos and movies and games and books, they're referential to past things. They'll bring something up. They'll redo something. There's an adaptation. It's a huge thing in Hollywood. And that's not even a recent thing. That's like within the last 30 years. Everything is an adaptation. Everything is an omake. Everything is a redo. Everything is a restart. Everything is somehow bringing back an idea that was good and seeing if we can just cash in a little bit more on it. Dune worked. Outlaw Star. Wow, I keep saying Outlaw Star. Cowboy Bebop didn't. Overall, though, for anyone who hasn't seen either one, if you haven't seen Dune, it's not an action movie. Don't go into it thinking it's an action movie. It's a political thriller set in space with some admittedly really good CGI that's really downplayed because it's a low-tech environment somehow. And that's intentional due to backstory reasons, which you won't get because you don't really need it to know the story, to know what's going on, to know the human aspect of it. And then you come to Cowboy Bebop and it's the exact opposite. You need the nostalgia. You need to know what came first because you will not get what the hell is going on. You don't get why these characters love each other because they don't seem to. Why they kind of worked as a family. It's disjointed and fucked up as it was. You don't need to know anything about the new show to get the old one, but you needed to know everything about the old show to get the new one because they didn't add the context. They beat it into your face to the point where it became meaningless. I'm looking at you, Syndicate and Vicious. That was such a... Draco Malfoy's dad was the main villain. Everything that made the Netflix show good is nostalgia, and they just didn't capitalize on it well because they didn't follow up well. They didn't do it well. They just had it. They referenced it. But they never really did it justice. They're basically doing the exact same thing. But one stands on its own and one needs the original source material. Both are trying to sell themselves with nostalgia, but one of them needs it, the other doesn't. For everyone who hasn't, watch Dune. It's awesome. If you like political thrillers, if you like general sci-fi, if you want something that feels like the first movie in Lord of the Rings, where there's a lot of downtime and it's just kind of fun, but has moments of intensity, it's great. You'll love it. If you want something that feels like your childhood's being torn out through various holes in your body that weren't there 5 minutes ago, watch Netflix's Cowboy Bebop. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you want, tell me more things you want to just check out what's going on. I like taking dives into these types of videos. I like looking at what's going on, and I want to see what happens. So if you haven't, hit me up. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And if there's anything else you want me to take a look at, let me know. I'll see you guys in the next one. Please, please, please don't let it be Dragon Ball Evolution. Don't let it be Dragon Ball. Just don't. I don't want to have to watch that. Just please, no. It's going to be Dragon Ball Evolution. The comments are just going to be Dragon Ball Evolution. Nothing else. Oh, God. I've made a mistake.